Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into a really profound philosophical shift. We're talking about taking all that energy we normally spend managing our outward appearances and completely flipping it, pointing it inward to cultivate an invisible, quiet discipline. You know, we spend so much of our lives curating what the rest of the world sees, but honestly, we've kind of got our priorities totally backwards. It's time we start building the quiet mind.
And to kick us off, we're looking at Carl Jung, who brilliantly hits the nail on the head here. He pointed out that confronting the dark, uncomfortable, hidden parts of ourselves, what he calls our shadow, well, it isn't this terrible diminishing act of exposure. It's actually the exact opposite. To truly look at your shadow is to discover the real light you're capable of. I mean, it's wild, but the uncomfortable truth is incredibly illuminating. Difficulty, as it turns out, is exactly what clarifies things for us.
So the big question isn't how do we avoid our shadow? That's completely the wrong way to look at it. Instead, we have to ask ourselves one really fundamental question. Am I actually willing to look? Because if we are willing to look, well, we start to spot this massive gap between what appears to be and what actually is. It's that huge gap between just performing a life for an audience and, actually living one. And this whole illusion of the visible, that's exactly where we get tripped up. Which brings us to Section 1, the illusion of the visible. Take a look at this totally inverted reality. Most of us, we spend just an enormous amount of energy managing that visible column on the left. We obsessively train the physical body, we carefully cultivate our image, and we completely silence our courage with comfort, usually while convincing ourselves we're just being prudent. Meanwhile, we are literally starving the invisible column on the right. The mind, our character, true courage. And ultimately, this just leads to lives packed with really high surface activity, but rapidly diminishing depth. All right, moving into Section 2, flipping the hierarchy. Okay, so Tommy Kono, an absolute legend in Olympic weightlifting who set world records in 4 different weight classes, gave us this exact breakdown. And he actually said it should embarrass anyone who spends more time at the gym than in deliberate thought. Look at those numbers. 50% mental, 30% technique, and only 20% power. Even in a sport that seems purely physical, the invisible mind completely dominates the required skill set. And hey, the specific sport doesn't even matter. You could plug business or creative work or even parenting into this chart and the hierarchy totally holds up. That invisible layer, it is always the primary driver.
You know who else understood this dynamic perfectly? Bruce Lee. He knew for sure that the visible layer, just the raw physical output, isn't actually what makes a champion. He tells us that the successful warrior is just an average person who has managed to master the invisible lever of sustained, disciplined attention. Because focus isn't some genetic personality trait you're just born with. It is a highly trainable, invisible practice. And it's exactly what elevates an average person way above someone who's just physically gifted. And this totally echoes ancient wisdom from heavy hitters like Aristotle and leaders like Marcus Aurelius. Think about it. Aurelius, the guy running the most powerful empire on earth, had the exact same 24 hours in his day as a Roman senator who did absolutely nothing. What sets truly powerful leaders apart isn't their raw, visible capability. It's the daily, quiet routine of excellent habits. Aristotle basically said we become what we repeatedly do. So the person who cultivates genuine, deep engagement with their craft, they're going to produce a qualitatively different result from the person who just visibly shows up.
Let's roll right into Section 3, navigating invisible systems. Now, to really grasp this shift, military strategist Robert Greene points us to the absolute oldest form of deception, the false front. Picture this. Right before the Battle of Austerlitz, Napoleon was heavily outnumbered. So what does he do? He deliberately projects this visible image of total panic and fear. And his enemies, well, they read only those visible surface signals, completely abandon their strong defensive positions to go on the attack, and walked directly into a massive trap. It brilliantly proves that we must never ever mistake surface appearances for reality. A quiet mind is able to see right through the false front, like mistaking busyness for actual productivity, or just loud confidence for real competence, and instead responds to what is actually going on. But this trap definitely goes way beyond the battlefield. The strategist Seth Godin actually expands this idea of the false front into literally every institution we're a part of. He defines systems as these invisible forces, boundaries, and feedback loops that offer us stability, but only in exchange for our compliance. And the real trap here? The system's norms are usually completely invisible to the people stuck inside it. It's exactly like a fish that doesn't see the water it's swimming in. We just don't realize that the system is quietly making inaction and compliance the path of least resistance.
And this crazy misalignment of systemic rewards perfectly explains why capable, deeply principled people so often end up doing absolutely nothing when something is clearly wrong. Whether we're talking about the ancient Roman Senate under corrupt emperors just optimizing for their own self-preservation, or modern political leaders, like journalist Ezra Klein observes here. The system constantly forces a choice. In institutions, they frequently reward comfort over courage. So being able to clearly see this invisible system is the absolute prerequisite for acting freely within it.
Moving on to Section 4, the courage to act.
So think back for a second to those ancient senators who just sat there, watched corruption spread, and did nothing. They weren't these dramatic cowards facing certain physical death. Not at all. They simply feared a really ordinary thing, losing their status and their comfortable little positions. They fell into the exact trap Paulo Coelho is warning us against right here. They said yes to the court, and by doing that, they essentially said no to their own stated values and identities. They just chose the friction-free path.
And this just brilliantly highlights where courage actually lives. It doesn't usually call to us on a battlefield. It calls to us in highly ordinary moments. It's that moment you choose not to stay silent in a meeting when you know something's wrong. It's choosing brutal honesty in a relationship, even when it's deeply, deeply uncomfortable. There's this great old proverb, one of these days is none of these days. The courage that we continually put off today, that literally becomes the life we simply never end up living.
Now, as we work to build the character to actually choose courage, we have to make sure our ambition is pointed in the right direction. We've got to be super careful with how we channel this energy. The philosopher Epictetus reminds us that true beauty and excellence are built through the self-control of our ambitions. We really want to avoid those insatiable, inward-pointing, highly destructive paths of historical figures like, Tony Montana or Alexander the Great, guys who couldn't be contained by the entire world yet still ended up in a coffin. Instead, we need the kind of ambition that builds, the kind that's pointed outward, transforming the world around us through genuine, real contribution.
Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Operationalizing Inner Discipline.
Football manager Jose Mourinho brilliantly captures this reality for us. See, inner discipline can't just be this passive state where you sit around, meditate, and just accept things as they are. It has to be actively practiced into your body, your team, your institution. An army of lions achieves absolutely nothing without wise, operationalized direction. If your quiet mind never actually steps up and acts, well, it's really just another form of that cowardly Roman senator's silence, isn't it? So when you look at your own daily operations, you really have to ask yourself this piercing question. And honestly, this question lands like a heavy stone in still water. Are you inventing things to do to avoid the important work? We all love to invent visible busyness to dodge what matters. Why? Because the truly important work is almost always the unglamorous, behind-the-scenes interior cultivation of a quiet mind. It's confronting your shadow, and it's the quiet, boring repetition of excellent habits. But here's the payoff. When we finally confront the shadow of just managing our appearances while totally neglecting our character, we find our true light. And what exactly is that light? It's a quiet mind that can see clearly right through the false fronts of the world. It's a mind that acts courageously in the most ordinary of moments and contributes generously instead of just endlessly consuming. That is the light that is actually yours for the taking. Ultimately, the whole shebang boils down to this incredibly simple, audacious motto from the Marquis de Lafayette. Why not? And remember, he didn't use this in service of getting rich. He used it in service of securing liberty across 2 continents. So I want to leave you with this to ponder. If a life of genuine discipline, a quiet mind, and real impactful contribution is entirely available to you right now, today, what is actually stopping you from living it? Seriously, why not?